and Oliveira Lawyers. We are starting one more live stream. Today is March the 8th, Sunday, and now it's 3:34 Rio de Janeiro time. There was a time change in the US, so hopefully this time is also working for you. And let's get started. If you have a question or topic of your interest, let us know in the chat window below, and we're gonna have it discussed live. Heads up, if you're new here, we are able to discuss topics in general. We are not allowed by the buyer associations to provide you with like a personal consultation live. These, of course, will need to be in a different type of setting. And we are also not allowed to provide the consultations free of charge according to the Brazilian Bar Association and the Portuguese Bar Association as well. Very interesting to note that this is not the case for the US. In the US, attorneys advising on US law have much more discretion in terms of what you provide, in terms of those, funny and sometimes not so funny ads. And both the Brazilian and the Portuguese bar associations, they are much more strict on the activity of a lawyer. All right, let's take a look and see if there is anything so far. Yes, there is Hassan. How you doing, Hassan? Hassan is saying, hi, I want to buy an apartment in São Paulo. I need your help. Welcome to the live stream. First thing, Hassan, glad to have you over here. And yes, we do assist with many buyers of real estate in São Paulo. Not surprisingly, for the São Paulo market, apartments are pretty common. Okay, if you think about like the top neighborhoods in São Paulo, most of them they are gonna have apartments. Some premium neighborhoods they will also have houses, but because São Paulo is a major urban center, naturally there is a large number of apartments everywhere. Okay, let's take a look at the news. I have something here I think is interesting. I know I did share in the past, and this is like about those crazily expensive gyms in São Paulo. Okay, it looks like it is some type of trend, and the more they charge, like the more people they are going to attract in a certain segment of the ultra rich in Brazil. And here you can see the headline, right? This is Estadão. That's a pretty interesting newspaper. We picked this newspaper because it is somewhat balanced in terms of the political spectrum. Is not like all the way to the left, not all the way to the right, kind of balanced. And today they have this piece of news about a plan for 99,000 reais. And that's for a gym in São Paulo. It looks like they have 6 different units. Let's see if I can share a little bit about the gym. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to share or not. Yeah, it looks like it is sharing. So here you see the headline, 99,000 reais. And they have a Monjaro, right? Monjaro, I think it is something similar to Ozempic. And I don't know if it is included in the plan or not. But I mean, if you take a look at the gym, like it doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary, right? And but go figure, that's the gym that is on the newspaper with plans for 99,000 reais, which should be a little bit less than 20,000 US dollars. And that's, more common. I don't know if the common is the word, but this is the type of stuff you sometimes find in São Paulo. You're not going to find it elsewhere, okay? You're not going to find in Rio de Janeiro. You're not going to find it in other capitals in Brazil. That's the stuff that you just find usually in São Paulo. All right, let's take a look at some other news. Let's see if you can guess what's going to show up as the main headline. Yes, if you are attending our live streams, you knew what was going to show. And yes, it's about Banco Master. And, for those of you who are new to the live stream, Banco Master is a bank that, basically went bankrupt. And just the bankruptcy by itself is already a major news headline in Brazil, because the Brazilian banking system, it's extremely well regulated, okay? And so just this, bankruptcy alone is a major headline. But on top of that, there is a high entanglement of authorities, from different government levels, from the Brazilian Supreme Court, from the Brazilian federal government, from the Brazilian Congress, even from the Brazilian central bank, which is similar to the Fed in the U.S., in charge of regulating the bank system. So, it looks like the owner of this bank was kind of, pulling strings across the board. And that's why this topic is so recurring, right? Like you can, every single day when you open the newspaper, that's what you're going to see, on top of everything else. All right, so this is what we have for today. Let's go back to our chat and see what you guys want to talk about today. Remember, that's your live stream. You bring the topics of your interests, and I'm going to do my best to discuss them. General Principal, feliz domingo, senhor Oliveira. Feliz domingo, General Principal. I hope you're doing well. All good here. I hope the same with you. Marisa Navas, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Com muito orgulho, estamos juntos com você. Um grande abraço. Obrigado, Marisa e Ricardo, por sua presença. Thank you, Marisa and Ricardo, for showing up. Hassan, what is the price per square meter for buying property? Hassan, there are, all types of prices. It could be 10,000 reais per square meter, depending on the neighborhood. It could be 15, and it could be 20,000, okay? But just as a reference, if you want to use, between 10,000 reais per square meter to 20,000 reais per square meter, you're going to have a kind of range to play with. And something else we do, Hassan, over here, like we work with Remax. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Remax. Remax is huge in the United States, is also very present in Europe, like in Portugal and other countries, even in the Arab Emirates. I know that they are also very present. And this is the one we work with in Brazil. They are based in Rio de Janeiro, Leblon, but they work, with other agencies to get you the ideal property based on your requirements. So, nice thing about realtors, they are not like attorneys that you need to pay ahead of time, right? Like to work with attorneys don't work just on commission. Like you need to pay for a consultation, you need to pay for services. And realtors and brokers is a different type of compensation model. So here you go. If you want to contract them, you can ask for a sample list of properties based on your requirements, Hassan. And Kish, hi, I am a U.S. veteran. Thank you for your service, Kish. I am interested in a retirement visa in Brazil. wondering the amount I need to live comfortably in the northeast of Brazil. Kish, we do have this question every now and then, and it is tough. It is tough to answer because just like you saw, like I was sharing about, a gym in São Paulo charging $20,000 just for the membership. I would assume it's probably for a year, but that's something, of course, out of the ordinary. In São Paulo, you can have, great gyms, for less than $100 per month. But as you can tell from, that particular news, different people, they are going to have different standards and different expectations. So it's difficult, Kish, to tell you how much you're going to need to have a comfortable living. But I can tell you that many people are going to live really well in the Northeast with less than $1,000 a month, as long as they have their own property. Because in Brazil, rental costs, they are very meaningful from a kind of, monthly expenses perspective. So if you own the property, if you own a house, an apartment, you're going to be removing the largest cost component of your living expenses. And therefore, if you are a frugal person, $1,000 a month could be enough for you to have a comfortable living, if you will. Now, again, going back to the piece of news talking about the, $20,000 a year a gym plan, other people, they're going to say, listen, unless I have $2,000 or $3,000 a month, I'm unable to have a comfortable living. So it's all about standards and expectations. But my personal take is, if you are a frugal person, if you have your own property in the Northeast, $1,000 could be enough for you to have a comfortable standard of living. Okay, we have Hassan. What is the trust website to see the opportunities? Hassan, there are a couple of websites that you could use. Let me share a couple of them with you. Now, when you say trust, that's something that, of course, we cannot guarantee, because in Brazil, we don't have the, MLS, which is a single database for properties like you have in the United States. In Brazil, they are basically just like, websites for advertisement, meaning that there is no guarantee that what you see is what you get. Like, there is a lot of bait and switch, but this is a typical one, all right? Zap Imóveis. zapimóveis.com.br, okay? And you can come over here, for instance, right? Like if you want to find the properties in a good neighborhood, let's say you're doing Jardim Paulistano, Jardim Paulista, there is Jardim América, right? And then you want to find an apartment. You're going to search for an apartment, and there you go. You're going to have listings. As you can probably tell, Jardim América is a top neighborhood in São Paulo. I would say potentially like top 10 neighborhoods in the city of São Paulo. And the prices are going to be premium, as you can tell, right? Like, those first two, the first two apartments that I see over here, they are being sold around 7.5 million reais. Okay, so about, I'm just like, trying to calculate here from, from heart, I think, like $1.5 million, right? And that's like, the premium area of São Paulo. But then you can also, search for different neighborhoods. Let's take a look at Liberdade. Liberdade is closer to São Paulo downtown. Then, as you can tell, the prices are going to change dramatically. This one is like a small studio, and it's being sold for 180,000 reais. So, here we're talking about maybe 35,000 US dollars for a condo. I can tell you for sure this is gonna be an old building somewhere, and there may be issues with the documentation of this property here because the price, for a studio like this, like in a newer building, with good paperwork, it should be like 300,000 reais. Okay, so if it is being sold for 180, it may be like another building with some type of issue regarding documents. All right, but this is Zap Imóveis, and something interesting that has happened in the Brazilian market is that the Zap Imóveis, they've been buying other websites. So in the past, there was some level of competition, but last time I spoke with people from the real estate agency segment, like they were saying, listen, basically, nowadays it's just Zap Imóveis, and you think you have like different websites, but they are all owned by Zap Imóveis. And whenever you're gonna, place an ad, they actually give you an opportunity to place an ad on every single website of their portfolio. All right, so just keep that in mind. And again, I'm gonna hammer the fact that there is no MLS, there is no unified database in Brazil, and there is no way usually for you to verify if the listings here are real or not. So, be very careful with what you find and secure legal advisory, whether from our firm or someone else, to advise you and make sure that you're not going to lose your shirt when buying properties in Brazil. All right, let's see what else we have. We have a Matt Gaines. Good to see you, Matt. Oi, Dr. Oliveira. Adrian and I will be scheduling another consultation with you in a few weeks. All right, Matt. Always good to meet you and Adrian. We have been busy getting documents apostilled and meeting bank for wire transfer letter. Yes, Matt. So are you guys working with our team? They can advise you, right? Typically, some of these things, like we cannot get a letter from your bank for you. But if you're facing some type of, let's say, increased challenge, you could go back to our team member and ask for alternatives, right? Say, listen, I'm trying to get this letter and I'm unable to do so. And we may try to find alternatives if there is an alternative, right? For the letter, I know that some people, they work with banks that are not going to provide the letter. There was a strategy we used to use. We used to use like a while ago, and it was basically, gathering documents from the bank showing that the bank would allow a wire transfer. Another strategy, which I think it's even more straightforward, is for you to make a wire transfer to Brazil, right? So typically when you're working with us, you need to pay fees, you need to pay something. And if you make a wire transfer from the US into our Brazilian bank account, not our US bank account, our Brazilian bank account, guess what? You're going to be showing to the Brazilian immigration that you are able to make a wire transfer to Brazil. All right, so if the letter is being, too much of a headache for you to secure, an alternative, it would be for you to make a wire transfer from your U.S. bank account into our Brazilian bank account. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, Matt and Adrian. And yes, there is always, some level of red tape and bureaucracy whenever you're dealing with Brazil. But I know both of you are doing a great job on that front. And this reminds me of a consultation I had on Friday. And it was actually a client, applying for the renewal of the Brazil retirement residency. And he was complaining, right? Like he said, well, Brazil doesn't doesn't make it easy because Costa Rica, like they do that. And then there was, I think, Paraguay, like they almost don't charge any taxes at all. And I said, listen, I understand, but Brazil typically doesn't feel like they need to, work too hard for people to come anyway. So the mentality, and I'm not saying this is correct, like I'm not defending Brazil's position, but I'm just like, stating and highlighting that Brazil was never a country like chasing people to come over. I think more the opposite, right? Like Brazil wants to have a standardized framework and try to qualify people coming into Brazil. And from that perspective, yes, they are going to enforce a bunch of requirements. And this is not really different from other countries, particularly, the United States and the countries in Europe. They are going to, apply very similar requirements whenever accepting documentation provided by immigrants. Like they're going to be very demanding, and they are going to be very careful about what you are presenting. So Brazil is the same thing. Brazil is not going to, go out of its way for foreign citizens to come over. Actually, Brazil is going to be very careful in terms of documents. A very typical example is going to be the FBI background check. Like if you're coming from the US, you need to present an FBI background check. This document needs to be fresher than 90 days. And you're going to need to present an apostille on top of your FBI background check, so the Brazilian authority can tell that this is a legitimate document. All right, so it's more to highlight because many people, whenever they think about Brazil, unless of course they have a closer connection, they may incorrectly assume that Brazil is gonna be, like kind of, desperate to bring foreign citizens on board, and that's certainly not the case. All right. All right, general principle. I read a story about a real estate investor in Colombia that got the temporary visa, but Colombia changed the minimum investment amount, and now the property no longer qualifies for renewal. That's such an interesting question, general principle, and I'm going to tell you why. Because first thing, Brazil never changed the amount, even though it should, in my opinion, because this amount has been the same since 2018. So, in a couple of years, it's going to be like 10 years without ever updating the minimum amount for the investment. That's the first, nuance of this point, okay? And the second one, if you read, the piece of legislation, or better saying regulation, applicable to the Brazil real estate investor visa/residency, it doesn't address this type of situation. So, in other words, we don't know what would happen. I would assume, based on the dynamics of Brazilian immigration, that if you start your journey, meaning that you get the first 4 years, which is the temporary stage of the real estate investor residency, I think Brazil would be amenable to allow you to renew, because the heavy review is done at the beginning. So if you did the heavy review and it was approved, I don't think, down the line, Brazil is going to say, well, now it doesn't qualify anymore. Too bad. You're not going to get the renewal. I think that Brazil would be amenable to grant you like an extension or even the upgrade to the permanent residency, because again, like the heavy review was done at the beginning of your journey. But nice sharing. All right. Yes, General Principal asking, do you think this is a legitimate risk for Brazil based on its history and precedents if the minimum price amounts were to change? No, General Principal. Like, I mean, to be honest with you, I would, guesstimate, right? Like a 90% chance that an increase in minimum amount would not affect a renewal. Now, if you are in the process of buying the property and then the minimum amount changes naturally, the government doesn't have any commitment to you because you never filed for anything. But again, if let's say you buy a property, you file for the temporary residency, and then during the temporary residency stage, the minimum requirement changes, I'm 90% confident that you would be able to continue renewing or upgrading to the permanent residency since your property was approved at the beginning of this journey. Hassan, how long does the process take to complete buying property in Brazil? What are the documents required for non-Brazil, fees or tax related when you buy real estate? Hassan, many questions over there, right? Like this is typically enough for a whole consultation, like a 40-minute consultation, but just pinpointing some of the things, not answering in full, just because it would take a long time. But in terms of timeline, usually it takes 90 days for you to buy the property after you find the property, and an additional 90 days for you to secure the residency through real estate investment. So we're talking about 6 months. For some reasons, sometimes the buyer is not looking into moving to Brazil right away, so this could be like 9 months. But I would say timeline for this journey between buying the company and moving to Brazil, it is typically between 6 to 9 months. All right, in terms of documents, a boatload of documents, but just to give you a flavor of the red tape, this is going to depend on whether you are single or you married. If you are single, typically the closing cartório, they are going to ask you for an apostilled version of your birth certificate showing your parents' names on it, and that was issued within the last 90 days. If you're married, then instead of a birth certificate, you are typically requested for an apostilled marriage certificate, also showing your parents' names on it. All right, and then we spoke about timeline, about a single nuance about the documents and fees or taxes. We have an estimate for closing costs that are going to have within the property transfer tax. We typically estimate between 4 to 5% of the property amount. Naturally, this is just like out of pocket, right? Our fee is not included over there. And Aaron, my second home program was initially low. It attracted undesirable immigrants. They raised it drastically. Then applications dropped to near zero. 1 million reais seems like the sweet spot. Aaron, I agree with you. And this is like a recurring topic in our consultations. And then, when people ask, do you think they are going to change the amount? I typically have, two separate and somewhat opposing views on that, right? Like the first one is like when you think about inflation alone, like if they were to correct the 1 million reais, which was set back in 2018, it should be about 2 million reais now, right? So from this perspective, I say yes, I think it should be updated sooner than later. However, just like you said, because this is such a success for the Brazilian government, meaning that there is a boatload of people going through for this purchase and application. It looks like the government is also just like, sitting back and watching, this boatload of foreign citizens coming to Brazil. So from this perspective, I say, you know what, if something is working really well, maybe the government is going to avoid touching this and, bringing this risk of disrupting such a nice program. All right. Another interesting nuance, right? Trying to avoid, getting into politics, but the real estate investor visa/residency was created under the prior federal administration, and now the current one is just like enjoying it a lot. And they don't need to lift a finger, like they just need to sit and watch this thing working. So yes, from this perspective, I think it would make sense to keep amounts as well. So two different views, kind of opposing, but bottom line is like if this thing is working so beautifully, why change it, right, Aaron? That's a good point. Hassan, what type of property comes with security? Hassan, I'm not sure if I got your concern, but let's say if you're talking about safety, right? If you're talking about safety, like you're thinking about your well-being, your personal safety in general, apartments are gonna be a better choice because apartments, they are gonna be in a condominium, and apartments in Brazil, they will typically involve a large number of employees who are going to be working not only to keep things moving, but they are also going to keep an eye at safety in general. So you're going to have like a bunch of cameras, like, there is a garage entryway, there's going to be a couple of cameras, checking the garage. There will be cameras, potentially one for each floor or more than one. You're going to have, cameras for the perimeter, and you're going to have someone who's going to be watching these cameras, right? And if they see something suspicious, they are going to call the police and ask for help. So, condominiums, apartment buildings, they are typically safer than a house. And among different cities, you're also going to have different levels of safety. Unfortunately, the larger the city is, the more difficult it's going to be for the public authorities to keep safety under control. So if you are, if safety is a priority for you, I would advise you against, for instance, São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, right? They are pretty, large cities. And unfortunately, safety is not like, in the, like in the pros, right? Like, it's actually going to be a con when you comparing, the upsides and downsides. Safety for larger cities in Brazil, they are typically a downside. Now, there is a somewhat large city, which is a big exception, in my opinion, is going to be Florianópolis. And I discussed it before about Florianópolis. Florianópolis is an island, right? Like, so, bad people, right? Like thieves, bad apples, they don't typically like an island, because if you are in an island and if you do something wrong, guess what? Very easy, usually for, the police force to catch you. So, but that's not only that. There is also a cultural component. The south of Brazil is typically more developed than other areas, and that's also helpful from a safety perspective. But whenever I see someone hammering on safety, I'm gonna say, listen, if safety is your number one concern, consider Florianópolis. I'm not gonna say only city. There are many other cities, by the way, in Brazil, that could be even safer than Florianópolis, but then they are going to be usually much smaller. But Florianópolis is always a big contender whenever safety is a top priority for you. All right, 552. If I recently became a naturalized Ecuadorian citizen, could I instantly move to Brazil through the Mercosur, or do I need to wait 5 years? 552. I don't know if Ecuador is a member of the Mercosur. I'm going to assume you have checked on that. And if it is a member of the Mercosur, as long as you are a citizen, Brazil is never going to discriminate in terms of timeline. Okay, so what I'm saying over here is like, first, make sure Ecuador is a member of the Mercosur. Like, I don't check that, I don't follow up, and I don't care much because it's not like our target, type of client. This said, if Ecuador is part of the Mercosur and if you became a citizen, I don't see any reason for you to wait for any time. Brazil is not gonna, make make it harder for you just because you just recently became a naturalized Ecuadorian citizen. And by the way, congratulations. I guess this was like, something that you worked hard for it. So, congratulations for that. And then again, as long as you are a citizen as we speak, there is no reason for you to wait any time before applying for the Brazilian residency through the Mercosur route. Okay, and for those of you who don't know, like Brazil basically, gives you residency in Brazil just because you are a Mercosur citizen, right? And Mercosur is a kind of European Union of the Latin American countries. Not every single country is going to be a member, meaning that it's not just because a country is in South America or Central America that Brazil will automatically give you those benefits. Like, this country needs to be a member, like a formal member of the Mercosur. And there may be additional agreements on top of the Mercosur. The main one, right, like the main one from a practical perspective is going to be the Argentina-Brazil treaty, meaning that for Argentinians, they can secure, believe it or not, they can secure permanent residency right off the bat. So for most Mercosur applicants, they need to get 2 years of temporary residency, and after those 2 years, they can migrate to the permanent one. Now, if you're coming from Argentina, guess what? There is no such a thing as 2-year temporary residency. They go straight to the good stuff, which is the permanent residency. General Principal, wow, that was very generous, General Principal. General Principal is buying me, I guess, dinner tonight, and so much appreciated. Thank you very much, General Principal. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Aaron, condomínio fechado is kind of like gated community. Exactly, Aaron. That's a nice take. So you have the apartment buildings, and we typically call it condominium, right? Like even in Portuguese we say condomínio. And very interesting, the HOA association fees, right? Like the homeowners association fees. In Portuguese we say I'm gonna pay the condomínio. Okay, so that's typically for apartment buildings, but we also have condomínio for houses. Okay, two major destinations for house condominiums closer to São Paulo are gonna be Vinhedo and Valinhos, and we have a few clients as we speak acquiring properties in this kind of axis between Vinhedo and Valinhos. And over there is super common for this concept of a condominium of houses. That's how we explain in Portuguese. And now in English, right, like you would say gated community. And gated community, they are typically very, very safe because they have a whole, like a whole system, a whole team of people basically working to keep that specific area well protected. All right. I used to live, for a long time in a gated community in the city of Vinhedo. I like to joke like that was the best place I ever lived. All right. And I did live in many places. I still have, a meaningful presence in very different places, no longer in Vinhedo. But Vinhedo for me, it was like, I think, the best 5 years of my life. It was just perfect. Everything was perfect in Vinhedo. Okay, what else? Matt Gaines, is a birth certificate apostille no longer acceptable if you was apostilled more than 90 days before applying for retirement visa route? Matt, no, I was mentioning that for property acquisition, okay? And I'm going to explain to you the distinction. But for the purpose of applying for the retirement residency, there is no 90-day freshness requirement, if you will. And, if you are applying for a visa or a residency, the purpose of presenting your birth certificate is for the Brazilian Immigration Authority to understand who you are based on your parents' names. Because as a U.S. citizen, you don't have your parents' names on your passport, which is the case for some countries in Europe, but not the United States. So the Brazilian Immigration Authority is basically asking you the birth certificate so they can find out your parents' names. All right, that's the whole purpose. And from this perspective, it doesn't make sense for the immigration authority to enforce the 90-day rule. Now, let's explore why to buy a property. Let's explore why to buy a property. Many times the cartório is going to enforce the 90-day rule. And the explanation is kind of weird, to say the least. And it goes like this. If I am buying a property in Brazil as a single person, which I'm not, but let's pretend I am a single person and I'm buying a property in Brazil, the cartório, the closing registry, they want to make sure that I am single indeed. Otherwise, they are not going to allow me to register just by myself. They want to register the property on my name and on the name of my spouse. So they want to see a fresh birth certificate. And why does it matter how fresh it is? Because in Brazil, if you marry, guess what? The marriage is going to be recorded on your birth certificate. So when you're buying a property and the closing registry asks for a fresh birth certificate, they are basically saying, let me make sure that you are single indeed, because maybe you did marry recently and you're not telling us. So this is the whole reason for the cartório to ask you for a fresh birth certificate when you're buying real estate property. And by the way, this requirement is going to change depending on the state, on the city, and even within the city, you may have different cartórios with different interpretations. However, whenever we are advising on requirements, naturally, we're going to go with the most demanding standard, because let's say if the cartório is amenable, if they don't care about the 90-day freshness, you're not going to lose anything. But if we don't tell you about the 90 days requirement, and if you kind of miss the date for the closing and now you are on the hook for 10% of the price and damages, right? You're going to get mad with us for a reason. So that's why whenever you're buying property in Brazil, we're going to strongly advise the buyer to have a birth certificate issued and apostilled with less than 90 days. All right, Matt, I hope that was helpful. Hermon, afternoon, everyone. Hey, Hermon, it has been a while. Good to see you over here. Matt Gaines, good information. Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for such interesting questions. All right, let's see what else we have here. If we have anything else. Should just sharing again, because we're talking about real estate a lot. And we're going to share a little bit again about RE/MAX nomad states. which basically is helping with several of our clients to follow Brazil. You can take a look at their contact information right here on the screen, and you can get in touch and work on a sample property list. There you go. There is a WhatsApp number and there is an email address. You can get it now. If you forget about it and if you want to come back, you can just access the recording of today's live stream and you're gonna find this information handy. All right, we have Moses. Boa tarde, senhor. Do you think the consulate can refuse someone entry visa to Brazil after the residency visa has been approved for 4 years by the ministry? Moses, very, how can I say, is very difficult. And let me provide the context to the other watchers, Moses. So what Moses is asking over here is like this. Let's say Moses or, anyone else, let's say, this person cannot enter Brazil, right? I'm not talking about Moses. I'm talking about a generic individual, right? Let's say a person applied for a visitor visa to Brazil and the visa was denied. But this person really wants to come to Brazil. So a strategy out there is for this person to buy a property in Brazil remotely, because again, this person cannot come physically to Brazil. This person would buy the property remotely, through, of course, a power of attorney, right? They would send the monies. The money needs to be compliant. Like there's going to be a whole compliance process to make sure that the money is clean, and so on. But at the end of this journey, this person, even without coming to Brazil, would have acquired a qualifying property in Brazil. And then they would file for an application of the real estate investor visa, not residency. For residency, you apply while physically in Brazil. And a visa, you're going to apply when you are abroad, when you're not in Brazil. So in theory, this person could get the real estate investor visa approved in Brazil, even though this person is not physically in Brazil. And then this approval would be sent to the consulate or embassy in charge of the jurisdiction where this person lives. And then this person would attend an interview with the consulate or embassy to get the visa, to get the investor visa, right? So this is the journey we're talking about over here. And Moses' question is whether the embassy or the consulate can, even though the person was pre-approved for the real estate investor visa, if the embassy or consulate can deny the visa. And the short answer, Moses, is yes, they are free to do so. Now, in my understanding, after you did all of that, they should have a strong reason to deny your visa. And before you ask me, what those reasons could be, it could be, association with terrorism. It could be, I don't know, like criminal records, right? It could be evidence that the money used to buy the property it was not clean money. So I think for the embassy or consulate to deny you a visa that was pre-approved in Brazil, they should have a stronger reason to do so. If they do it just because they don't like you, I don't know. Let's say the immigration officer says, well, we denied the visitor visa, and now this guy, he tried to circumvent us by doing all of that, and just because of this, I'm not going to give him the investor visa. In this case, you would have a very strong foundation to secure the visa through a constitutional filing in Brazil. Right, so this is something we actually do here at the firm, not exactly for the real estate investor visa. We do for other reasons. But every now and then, if there is a denial of a visa, and we can tell, not for sure, but we can tell, by the circumstances of the application that there is some type of ill intent by the Brazilian consulate or embassy, yes, we can sue them, and we're going to sue them to push them to either issue the visa, or if they are not going to issue the visa, they need to give us very clear reasons why they are not issuing the visa. And again, if they have strong reasons, guess what? They are right. They are not going to give you the visa. But if they are unable to give us very strong reasons for denying your visa, they are going to be making our lives easier to secure the visa on your behalf. All right, so these are the dynamics. Moses, I hope it was helpful. Aaron, why does pão na chapa taste so much better than toast and butter in America? Yes, Aaron. So pão na chapa that Aaron is mentioning is basically the type of bread we have on a daily basis in Brazil. And very interesting, Aaron. This bread is gonna change name depending on the state, right? So, for instance, in São Paulo, we're gonna call it pão francês. So in São Paulo, we call our bread the French bread. Okay. Now, if you are, let me recall where they call it carioquinha. I think it is like in Fortaleza, Ceará, in general. We're gonna call it carioquinha. Which is a nickname for those who live in Rio de Janeiro, right? So in São Paulo, we make a reference to the French. When we are in Ceará, we make a reference to Rio de Janeiro. And there are many other names, right? But they are basically the very same thing. Oh, and by the way, in the United States, very interesting, the Brazilian community typically calls this bread Portuguese bread, right? So the names are all over the place, but they always refer to the same thing. Now, da chapa that Aaron is mentioning, da chapa means on the grill. Okay, so we get like this loaf of bread, this small loaf, individual loaf of bread. We're gonna cut in half. We're gonna apply butter. We're gonna spread the butter on it, and then we're gonna kind of compress against a grill. And that's the pão na chapa, okay? Now, the quality of pão na chapa is going to vary as well. And I'm sure Aaron has had different pães na chapas, but it also depends on where you're getting, right? Like, so, in Rio de Janeiro, like last time I had pão na chapa, it was in Copacabana. Okay, and in Copacabana, we used to go, to a very small bakery, and bread was basically coming out of the oven like every 5 minutes. So it was, so fresh. And then we would apply butter, and of course, like the staff would, compress the pão against the grill. And they would bring it back to us, and it would be super, super fresh. Now, if you're doing that at a lanchonete, right, which is the name of the place that we use, like whenever you're gonna eat a sandwich or like snacks and so on, they don't bake the bread, like they're gonna order elsewhere. So, yes, it is still gonna be much fresher than whatever you can have in the United States, but not so fresh as when you're getting directly from the bakery, right? Now, going back to Aaron's note, like in the United States, and that's going to be common for a whole variety of food. Typically food is going to be processed, or it's going to be produced in a way that's going to last long, right? Either because of long winters in the U.S. or because of economical reasons that people are going to bring food from another country. So I think, Aaron, in my opinion, that's the big distinction. In Brazil, we are always producing food like on the spot. In the U.S., like there is this whole culture of food being processed, far away and then being sent to you, wherever you are. But really nice sharing, Aaron. James Rochas, olá, boa tarde. Give some ideas about Ilhéus, Bahia. I'm curious to explore Bahian towns to live longer term. Obrigado. Yes, James, I've been to Ilhéus, right, or to several cities like Ilhéus, Salvador, Morro de São Paulo, Porto Seguro, Arraial da Ajuda. But I'm not really like, a big, expert in Bahia. I used to go to Bahia a lot in my 20s, right? And I would go for personal reasons. And it is a very unique state, right? Like even though it does resemble to some extent other states from the northeast of Brazil, I think it does have a very a special culture, right? Like I mean, there is a lot of there is a very heavy footprint from the African country cultures in Bahia, much more than what you're going to see in other northeast states. So this is going to reflect on culinary, it's going to reflect on customs, and so on, right? So first thing, very unique state. Now, in terms of living in Ilhéus, I know it's one of the largest cities in Bahia, right? Not as large naturally as Salvador, which is the capital of Bahia. And I would say that the most important component, James, is whether you adapt to the local culture, right? Like, I mean, some people, they are going to just love particularly the slower pace of living. If that's your, goal, like to be in a place where people are enjoying life more than anything else, where, the rhythm of living is not as fast as elsewhere, there may be a great choice. And Ilhéus, from a market perspective, is also, I think, an upside because, again, it's a large city by Bahia standards, meaning that if you buy in a good neighborhood and you need an exit strategy down the line, it's not going to be as difficult for you to sell if you were in a smaller town in Bahia. All right, so let's take a final one. We are approaching the end of today's live stream. Remember to like our live stream. Remember, to subscribe for more content. We are, recording a bunch of nice, interesting videos as we speak. And remember that our next live stream is going to be on Wednesday. So if I'm missing your question or topic of your interest, come back on Wednesday for more. But let's take a final one. Paul Fonseca, can my daughter, whose mother is Brazilian, can she help me get residential card in Brazil and my daughter live in the States? So Paul, first thing, yes, if you have a Brazilian child, you can apply for residency in Brazil, but the second part of the answer is that both you and your daughter should be living in Brazil already, right? Whenever you're going to apply for permanent residency in Brazil, you can apply from abroad. So this is, very recurring in our consultations. The person is in the US and the person says, well, now I have a Brazilian spouse and I want to apply for the passport, right? Like they want to apply for the passport. I say, listen, that's not how it works. First, you would need to apply for the residency. And after leaving Brazil for a while, under the permanent residency, that's when you have a shot at applying for citizenship or passport, if you will. Okay, now for you to apply for the permanent residency, you cannot apply from abroad. You cannot go to a Brazilian consulate and say, well, we want to live in Brazil. Can you give me the permanent residency? Residencies, they are only granted when you are physically in the country. And particularly in Brazil, they are going to make sure that you're going to be living on a permanent basis, not just temporarily. So they're going to have 4 or 5 different factors that they're going to look into to make sure that you are indeed living in Brazil. And then there is a technical concept. We say the caller and the called, right? The caller is the person who's calling you. In your case, the caller would be your daughter, and she should be living in Brazil on a permanent basis. And you, as being called by your daughter, should also be living on a permanent basis in Brazil. So if your daughter is not living in Brazil, Paul, unfortunately, this route would not work for you. All right, I want to say thank you for your presence. Very interesting subjects discussed today. If you arrived late here at the live stream, consider checking the whole recording on YouTube. Very interesting topics. Wishing you all a blessed rest of your day.